Hello, Carla Hartley here. Today I'm starting a series in which I'm going to be discussing your exit strategy with regard to getting out of your marriage or other long-term relationship and the various factors, things you can do to address that so your outcome is more favorable to yourself. This is going to be a bit of an offensive discussion for some people, maybe for everyone. But it's a discussion that needs to occur because invariably, at the time the dissolution starts, one party is much further along the road to divorce than the other. Often the party that's planning has an early advantage. He or she is emotionally and intellectually more prepared for a divorce or a breakup. And a lot of times that party will have started financial and custodial planning to make sure they get out of this relationship with the optimum result for themselves. Exit planning is not only limited to financial and custodial planning, however. I will say that it's a lot easier as counsel to meet with someone when they know their marriage is going south, rather than waiting until they've been served with divorce papers. The early signs of a looming breakup are often ignored by the party who is not prepared emotionally for divorce. He or she is looking at the relationship and thinking he or she are still in marriage counseling, wondering if they need advice. The worst thing you can do is not get advice when you're starting to hear that little voice in your head that's telling you the other party is making plans to get out of the relationship, or the little voice that's telling you you really need for your own well-being to get out of this relationship. I'm not saying abandon your marriage without cause, but I am saying you need to be paying attention to your own tuition and to your own analysis of your circumstances. Now, the nature of my confidential relationship with clients requires that I do this today in this series in very general and non-specific terms. Hopefully you can take what I'm going to tell you and extrapolate that information and apply it to your own circumstance. Now, what is an exit strategy and when can it apply? As a U.S. Marine, we learned early on that you don't infiltrate until you have a plan for exfiltration. Fortunately for our society, marriages are not generally approached, for the most part, with the same degree of commitment to successful exfiltration. But that is not always the case. In some marriages, the exit strategy starts before marriage. It starts with a prenuptial agreement. I understand that may be construed as an offensive comment, but the reality is that the prenuptial agreement is established before marriage and by its very terms provides for that exit strategy, protecting the separate property and support rights, and in some cases, the support rights of the parties. More often than not, though, only one party is really protected. The prenuptial agreement is that party's advanced planning for exfiltration from the relationship. There is no other realistic way to put that, and I know it is not politically correct. There are many, many circumstances where, however, in the course of the marriage, the prenuptial agreement can be compromised, and it often is. So one of my favorite things is breaking a prenuptial agreement, but that's a discussion for another day. If you don't have a prenuptial agreement, can you still have an exit strategy? Absolutely. The problem is we have huge cultural biases against getting a divorce in this country, but the other problem is we also have a very high incidence of divorce. So let's go back to my assertion that generally one party is emotionally and intellectually further out of the marriage than the other. Let's keep this in mind that often the other party is more vested in the marriage as time goes on than the other. It's uncountable for me how many times someone is coming in just absolutely shocked that their spouse or their husband or wife has, after all these years or just a couple of years, decided to file for dissolution of marriage. But nearly every time when we have that shocked spouse, we see that the surprised and emotionally devastated spouse has had signs and warnings of the other party's intent to leave the marriage for months and sometimes years. Those signs and warnings constitute, in part, their ex's or their future ex's exit strategy. So, I'm guessing you would like some quick examples. One really good example, when you have had separate property for many years, say it was your separate property going into the marriage or you inherited during marriage, and it remained separate property for several years. and suddenly your spouse wants to be on title to your separate property. He or she doesn't say, quote, I'm planning to leave the marriage and I want to be on title. That's not what they're going to say. The leaving spouse, the planning spouse, will generally assert their intent in more feeling terms. They will assert trust issues or lack of love or fear of the future. I can't trust you if you don't put me on title. You don't love me, not really. If you really loved me, you'd show me by putting me on title. If you die, I won't get anything from this, and it makes me worry about the future. You could make me feel so much better just by putting me on title. Those comments along those lines, variation of those comments, have occurred so often with such success that it boggles my mind. And then a year or two or even 5 years later, the action for dissolution of marriage is filed, and now we're dealing with having to go back in time and try to either set aside this deed, putting the other party on title, or simply asserting a Family Code Section 2640 reimbursement interest to try to make our client whole. We're pretty successful with this, but this series is aimed at trying to save you that trauma. Now, these type of exit strategies are not just in regard to real property. These are also used to get onto bank accounts, to get the separate property holder to commit large amounts of money to improvements on projects titled to the community. I've seen cases where money was taken out of a separate property premarital 401k and rolled into an annuity purchased during marriage. Now, we have remedies, but it's always more expensive than it would have been just to keep your separate property separate. These are all warning signs. If these are happening early in the marriage, in many cases, it's a sure sign that the marriage was not solely for the benefit of your company. All right, what types of exit strategies are there? I've discussed financial exit strategies. Custodial exit strategies are often used to isolate the other party from the children for a long time before the planning party files a dissolution. Or a parentage action, chooses to move out, stuff like that. I want to be clear as well that often people in abusive relationships, particularly where those relationships are physically abusive, need to have an exit strategy. That exit strategy is aimed at securing the safety of the abused spouse through the most dangerous part of the relationship, their escape. I don't want to make this too long of a discussion. I want this to be an introduction, so you'll look at this and hopefully pay attention to some of the posts that I'm going to have following this, in which I speak more specifically about exit strategies. I want you to know what you can do to help yourself by looking a little bit down the road, recognizing warning signs if you're in that stage of your relationship, and also how to maneuver yourself towards an exit in legally permissible and advantageous ways. Though to be sure, I'm going to reserve most of that for my own clients. Try to think about what you can be doing to protect yourself if in fact your marriage or long-term relationship is at risk. I hope you find this helpful. I hope you will come back and listen to more of what I have to say on this because it's important. Thank you.